And Harry? He admits now he was blind to it. He thought he was making a brave, independent choice. In reality, he was a supporting character in Meghan's larger script. That revelation alone is devastating. Do you see how calculated it feels when you lay it out step by step? Royal duties discarded. Strategic interviews given. Hollywood doors flung open. Privacy claimed, yet Netflix cameras invited in. Each move more contradictory than the last, yet each move perfectly aligned with Meghan's alleged endgame: to transcend royalty and become a global celebrity powerhouse. But here's the emotional twist. Harry wasn't just betrayed, he was complicit. He walked away from his family, his duty, his legacy. He believed he was protecting Meghan. In reality, he was advancing her ambition. And now, standing in the wreckage, he realizes it. That's what makes his confession so haunting. It's not just about Meghan's orchestration. It's about his own role in carrying it out. And the world? The world is furious. Supporters who once cried for their safety now feel duped. Critics who suspected Meghan all along now feel vindicated. The monarchy, which bore the brunt of public anger, now looks less like a villain and more like a victim. The narrative has flipped on its head. But here's the question that lingers, the one no one dares answer. If Meghan orchestrated their exit, what else did she orchestrate? Was every interview, every charity project, every teary confession part of a larger performance? And if so, where does the performance end and the truth begin? Harry hasn't told us yet. Not fully. He's only cracked the door open. But behind that door lies the real bombshell. The precise moment he discovered the exit was never his idea. The instant he realized Meghan had been moving pieces on a board he didn't even know existed. That's the revelation still waiting in the wings. And when it comes, it won't just expose Meghan's ambition. It will expose the entire machinery behind Megxit. The Hollywood handlers, the secret negotiations, the friends who whispered in her ear while Harry sat oblivious. Because Harry's confession wasn't the climax. It was the prelude. And what's coming next? That's where the real storm begins. But the one warning Harry ignored, the one that could have stopped it all, came from someone closer than anyone imagined. And when that truth emerges, it will show just how far Meghan's orchestration went, and how blind Harry truly was. Harry was warned, but by whom? That's the haunting question hanging in the air as we move deeper into this unraveling saga. Because behind every disastrous choice, there are always voices in the background, pleading, advising, sometimes even begging the person they love to see sense. And Harry, blinded by passion, chose not to listen. Imagine it. The corridors of Kensington Palace, the hushed conversations behind closed doors, the cautious tones of people who had seen ambition dressed up as love before. The warnings weren't whispers in tabloids or idle gossip. They came from those closest to him. From family, from friends, from advisors who had spent their lives protecting the crown. And yet, Harry ignored them all. Why? Because when you're in love, when you believe you've found your savior, you don't hear warnings. You hear noise. One of the earliest warnings reportedly came from William himself. Take your time, Harold. Don't rush it. Those were the words Harry later admitted stung him to the core. What William meant as brotherly caution, Harry took as condescension, even betrayal. He was furious, convinced his older brother was jealous, dismissive, unwilling to welcome Meghan with open arms. But what if William wasn't dismissing Meghan? What if he saw something Harry couldn't? Something in her demeanor, her ambition, her hunger for the spotlight? And it wasn't just William. Princess Anne, known for her blunt honesty, is said to have raised concerns too, and never played games with words. She believed duty came first, always. And Meghan? Meghan seemed to treat duty like a costume, something you wear when convenient, discard when it weighs too heavy. And Sharp Eyes noticed, and she warned Harry. But Harry, fiercely protective of his wife, dismissed it as old-fashioned rigidity. They just don't understand her, he told himself. But what if they did? What if they understood her all too well? Then came Charles, the father who had already endured scandal, ridicule, and decades of public scrutiny. Charles urged caution, not out of cruelty, but out of experience. He knew the press. He knew ambition. He knew the dangers of marrying into the crown without fully grasping its chains. But Harry didn't want to hear it. He had grown up resenting his father's distance, his failings, his inability to shield Diana. In Meghan, Harry believed he had found the opposite of everything Charles represented. He didn't just ignore his father's warning. He ran in the opposite direction. But perhaps the most chilling warnings of all came not from family, but from palace staff. These were the people who worked in the shadows, who saw the daily interactions the public never glimpsed. Assistants who noticed Meghan's impatience with tradition. Advisors who watched her carefully curated image. Security officials who questioned whether safety was truly the issue, or whether Meghan was using safety as a convenient narrative. They raised red flags. They wrote memos. They spoke quietly in meetings. But Harry brushed it off as bias, as snobbery, as resistance to change. Now, years later, Harry admits he was wrong, that he ignored these voices, that he dismissed them out of blind devotion. And that admission cuts deeper than any confession about Meghan herself, because it reveals that Harry knew, on some level, that the people around him weren't lying. They weren't jealous. They weren't trying to sabotage him. They were trying to save him. Have you ever ignored advice because it didn't align with what you wanted to hear? That's the tragedy of Harry's story. He mistook love for clarity. He believed loyalty to Meghan meant disloyalty to everyone else. And in doing so, he silenced the very people who might have saved him from the pain he now endures. But let's pause here. What does it say about Meghan if so many different people, from William to and to palace staff, raised concerns? Were they all wrong? Or was there a pattern so glaring that only Harry, blinded by love, couldn't see it? And if Meghan truly was manipulating the situation, doesn't Harry's confession prove that every single warning was justified? The irony is devastating. Harry once claimed the royal family failed to protect Meghan. Now, by his own words, it seems Meghan may have been the one he needed protection from. And yet, there's one warning that stands above the rest. One warning that pierced closer to Harry's heart than any other. It didn't come from William. It didn't come from Charles. It didn't even come from palace staff. It came from someone Harry trusted deeply, someone outside the palace walls, someone who knew him better than most. A voice he should have recognized as truth, but one he tragically chose to ignore. Because that warning, unlike the rest, wasn't about Meghan's ambition or her attitude toward royal duty. It was about Harry himself, about what he was becoming, about how far he was drifting from the man he once was, and the legacy his mother left him. That warning could have changed everything. It could have stopped the exit, saved the marriage, preserved Harry's place in the crown. But he didn't listen. And by the time he realized the truth, it was already too late. But who was it? Who dared to say what no royal could? And why did Harry ignore the one voice that might have saved him? The answer lies in a conversation so personal, so intimate, that Harry has never spoken of it publicly. Yet it exists. And when revealed, it will show just how far the cracks had spread, long before the world saw them. Because the one person who tried hardest to warn Harry wasn't William, wasn't Charles, wasn't Anne. It was someone else entirely. And when the world learns who, the tragedy of Harry's blind loyalty will be impossible to deny. Why did Meghan care more about red carpets than royal duties? That's the question that gnaws at the heart of Harry's confession, and it's the question that makes everything snap into focus. Because while Harry was clinging to the idea that their marriage was about love, about unity, about survival, Meghan was allegedly dreaming of something else entirely: Hollywood. Think about the contrast. Royal duty is grueling. Endless public engagements. Smiling until your cheeks ache. Dinners with diplomats. Charity openings in remote villages. Rules stacked upon rules. What to wear, how to sit, what to say, what not to say. Meghan, from the start, seemed uncomfortable with the cage. Yet when you place her under the lights of Hollywood, the cameras flashing, the microphones angled toward her, she came alive. She wasn't just comfortable. She thrived. Here's the chilling part. Meghan didn't just want to escape the rigidity of royal life. She allegedly wanted to trade it in for something far more intoxicating: global celebrity. And Harry now admits, with heartbreaking clarity, that he didn't see it. He thought the move to California was about freedom. But it wasn't. It was about fame. Do you remember the images that flooded the internet in those first few months after Megxit? Meghan at glitzy events. Meghan reconnecting with Hollywood agents. Meghan and Harry hobnobbing with Oprah, Tyler Perry, Serena Williams. These weren't the actions of a couple retreating from the spotlight. They were the moves of a couple chasing it. Meghan was suddenly exactly where she'd always wanted to be. on the guest lists of Hollywood's elite, in the homes of producers, on the lips of A-listers. And here's where the irony stings. Meghan once claimed she didn't know much about the royal family before marrying Harry. She painted herself as naive, unprepared for the life ahead. But she knew Hollywood. She understood the currency of fame better than anyone in the palace ever could. And she used that knowledge like a weapon. While Harry believed they were building a quiet life, Meghan was allegedly sketching out her Hollywood blueprint. Content deals, podcasting, brand partnerships, red carpet appearances. Every move was designed to elevate her profile. Archewell wasn't just a charitable foundation, it was a brand. And Harry? Harry was the draw. The prince who walked away from the crown. The tragic son of Diana. The man the world couldn't stop watching. Meghan knew it, and she leveraged it. But Harry didn't see it. At least, not at first. He was too busy convincing himself that California sunshine meant freedom. He thought he was shielding Meghan from cruelty. In reality, he was ushering her straight into the glittering world she craved. Now ask yourself this. Why would a woman who claimed to fear for her safety sign on for a Netflix docuseries that invited cameras into her home? Why would someone pleading for privacy launch a Spotify podcast that depended on constant personal revelations? Why would Meghan align herself with Hollywood's most powerful players if her goal was peace? The contradictions scream louder than words. Harry, now looking back, admits he was blind. And that blindness cost him dearly. Because every Hollywood step Meghan took pulled him further away from the man he once was. The soldier, the prince, the son of Diana. And deeper into a role he never truly fit. Meghan's supporting act. And here's the cruelest twist of all. Meghan's obsession with Hollywood wasn't just about her own fame. It came at Harry's expense. The more she shone, the more he dimmed. The more she thrived, the more he faltered. Hollywood wanted Meghan. Hollywood tolerated Harry. And slowly, painfully, he realized it. The deals reflected it too. Meghan's name carried sparkle. Harry's carried trauma. He was asked to retell his pain, to relive his grief, to monetize his wounds. Meghan was celebrated as a feminist, a modern icon, a trailblazer. Harry was reduced to despair, again and again, even in the very Hollywood circles he thought would finally accept him. And that's when resentment began to creep in. Because while Meghan was chasing red carpets, Harry began to feel the hollowness of it all. The glitz, the glamour, the champagne. It didn't fill the void left by family, by duty, by purpose. He started to see the cracks. He started to notice that every step into Hollywood was another step away from the life he once knew, the life he now admits he regrets leaving behind. Have you ever sacrificed something for someone you love, only to realize it wasn't worth the cost? That's Harry's truth. He traded the crown for California. He gave up legacy for limelight. And Meghan? She reveled in it. But here's where the story twists again. Hollywood, fickle as ever, began to turn. The docuseries lost momentum. The Spotify deal collapsed. Archetypes was mocked more than it was praised. Invitations slowed. Suddenly, Meghan's obsession with Hollywood wasn't just a dream. It was a crumbling one. And Harry, standing beside her, saw the empire they'd built on celebrity start to collapse. That collapse is what drove his confession. That collapse is what forced him to admit that Meghan's pursuit of Hollywood wasn't just an ambition. It was an obsession. One that had cost him his family, his reputation, and now his marriage. But here's the cliffhanger. The obsession with Hollywood wasn't just about Meghan's ambition. It was about control. And one shocking detail about their contracts, a clause buried deep within the paperwork, revealed just how little power Harry actually had. When he discovered it, it shattered him. Because it proved once and for all that this was never his dream. It was hers. And that one contract clause changed everything. Follow the money, and the truth always reveals itself. That phrase has been whispered in political scandals, celebrity breakups, and business collapses for centuries. And when you apply it to Harry and Meghan's story, the results are chilling. Because if Harry's confession is the spark, then the financial web is the fire. And once you trace the money trail, the illusion of love and safety unravels into something far more transactional. Let's start with the Netflix deal. A headline-grabbing, jaw-dropping, $100 million contract. At first glance, it looked like vindication. Harry and Meghan walking away from the monarchy only to secure one of the largest media deals of the decade. But when the details began to leak, it became clear who the real star was. Netflix didn't pay for Harry and Meghan, Duke and Duchess. They paid for Meghan, the Hollywood insider with a narrative the world couldn't resist. Harry was there to add legitimacy, to add royal blood. But when it came to content, the cameras lingered on Meghan's journey, Meghan's struggles, Meghan's voice. Harry was an accessory in his own story. Then there was Spotify, another multi-million-dollar agreement. Meghan's Archetypes podcast launched with fanfare, hailed as a feminist platform that would amplify female voices. But how long did it last? A single season. And even then, reports suggested Meghan leaned heavily on producers, that much of the podcast was ghostwritten or engineered for effect. Spotify executives were brutal and private. One even allegedly called the couple grifters. Harry was nearly invisible in that deal. It was Meghan's show, her face, her voice, her brand. And then there's Archewell, their grand foundation, marketed as a force for change, a platform for global philanthropy. But when investigators dug into the filings, what did they find? Limited activity, bloated costs, grand announcements with little follow-through. Critics accused them of using Archewell more as a PR shield than a functioning charity. To the public, Archewell was about impact. Behind the curtain, it looked suspiciously like branding. This is where the financial web becomes sinister. Because while Meghan's ambitions were being funded by these deals, Harry was the one paying the deeper price. His reputation, his family ties, his very sense of self. And yet, he wasn't even in control. Contracts carried clauses Harry has reportedly only recently understood, that gave Meghan disproportionate power. In at least one major deal, Meghan's creative control was paramount, while Harry's input was relegated to optional. Imagine discovering that. Imagine realizing that not only were you sidelined in your marriage, but even in the business ventures supposedly built for both of you, you were nothing more than a name on the paperwork. And this is where the regret takes root. Harry confesses that he turned his back on the crown, believing he was protecting his wife and children. But in reality, he was walking into contracts that stripped him of the very agency he thought he was reclaiming. He didn't escape control. He traded one form of control, the monarchy, for another, far harsher one, Hollywood. Now let's step back. Why does this matter? Because the monarchy may be restrictive, but it doesn't operate for profit. Its purpose, at least in theory, is service. Hollywood, on the other hand, is profit incarnate. Fame is currency. Trauma is monetized. Stories are packaged and sold. Harry, who once claimed he hated the press for exploiting his mother, suddenly found himself in a world where his own trauma was the selling point. Can you see the irony? Can you feel the sting of betrayal, not just by Meghan, but by himself? And here's where it cuts deepest. Every financial deal seemed to distance Harry further from his family. Each contract was another nail in the coffin of reconciliation. When Spare hit shelves, with its intimate revelations about William, Charles, Camilla, it wasn't just a book. It was a paycheck, a contractually obligated confession. Meghan may not have written it, but her fingerprints were all over the decision. Why? Because controversy sells. Pain sells. And Harry's pain was the crown jewel. Now, critics argue this was Meghan's plan all along. Marry into royalty. Create drama. Exit spectacularly. Monetize the fallout. If that's true, then Harry's words, it was never about safety. It was always about celebrity, become more than just regret. They become confirmation. Confirmation that Meghan allegedly saw him not as a partner, but as a platform. But Harry wasn't blind forever. The financial web, once a golden promise, began to unravel. The Netflix content underperformed. The Spotify deal collapsed. Archewell's reputation wavered. And in the midst of it all, Harry realized something shocking. He had no control. His name was on the deals, but Meghan held the power. She was the draw. She was the star. He was the spare, again. Have you ever signed onto something thinking it was equal, only to later discover you had no say at all? That's Harry's nightmare. To the world, he was the husband, the duke, the co-architect of their empire. Behind the scenes, he was little more than a silent partner, dragged along by Meghan's ambition. And here's the cliffhanger that twists the knife. In one of the major contracts, rumored to be the Netflix deal, there was a clause so shocking, so revealing, that when Harry finally read it in full, he understood the truth. The deal wasn't about Harry and Meghan. It was about Meghan. The clause ensured that even if the couple split, Meghan's brand, Meghan's image, Meghan's control remained intact. Harry was replaceable, expendable, disposable. That clause wasn't just ink on paper. It was the moment Harry realized his marriage was no longer about love, family, or partnership. It was about leverage, about power, about celebrity. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. But the story doesn't stop there. Because the financial betrayal paved the way for something even more devastating: betrayal behind closed doors. Fights, ultimatums, and heartbreak that would tear at the very core of their marriage. And one argument in particular, the one that finally broke them, wasn't about family, wasn't about love. It was about power. What really happened behind those gilded doors when the cameras were gone, when the lights of Hollywood dimmed, and when Harry and Meghan were left with only each other. This is the part of the story Harry never wanted the world to hear. The part that cuts through all the glossy magazine covers, the polished interviews, and the rehearsed PR statements. Because behind closed doors, love was not enough. And the truth, when it finally came out, was far uglier than the fairy tale. Imagine a man stripped of his legacy, stripped of his family, stripped even of the trust he once placed in his wife. Imagine that man realizing the life he built was not his own, but hers. That's Harry's reality. His confession didn't just expose financial manipulation. It exposed the rot at the very core of his marriage. Arguments became a routine. Not small spats, but explosive confrontations. Meghan demanding more control, more exposure, more leverage. Harry pleading for balance, for family, for a life away from the chaos. These weren't disagreements. They were ultimatums. And in every ultimatum, Harry lost ground. Let's paint the scene. One night in Montecito, the quiet shattered. Harry, frustrated after yet another tense call with William, begged Meghan to slow down, to consider repairing ties with the family. Meghan, furious, snapped back that reconciliation would destroy everything they had worked for. She accused him of weakness, of disloyalty. "Do you want to crawl back to them?" she allegedly spat. Harry, trembling, insisted he just wanted peace. But peace, Meghan said, was weakness. Peace didn't sell. That's when the walls began to close in. Because Meghan's vision was empire building and Harry's was healing. They were no longer aligned, if they ever truly were. Do you remember Harry's words during the Oprah interview? "All I wanted was to protect my family." Those words now read like a tragic irony. Behind the scenes, Meghan allegedly pushed him to weaponize that very sentiment. To speak more, reveal more, sell more. To use his pain, his trauma, his mother's ghost as currency. Harry wanted to protect his family. Meghan wanted to project hers. And those two desires collided like fire and ice. The fights escalated. Friends whispered of slammed doors, of long silences, of Harry storming out into the Montecito night. He would wander the grounds alone, Diana's image haunting him, asking himself if his mother would be proud or horrified of what he had become. Meghan, meanwhile, retreated into strategy. Phone calls to publicists, quiet meetings with brand consultants, drafts of speeches and memoir outlines. While Harry drowned in regret, Meghan doubled down on ambition. And then came the moment, the fight that broke them. It wasn't about money, though money was the trigger. It wasn't about fame, though fame was at the center. It was about power. Harry discovered a clause in one of their contracts, one that gave Meghan full control over creative direction, even in projects tied to his own name. That clause, the one that proved he was secondary in his own empire, lit the fuse. He confronted her. His voice shaking, he demanded to know why. Why had she signed it? Why had she sidelined him? Meghan didn't deny it. Instead, she delivered the line that shattered Harry's heart. "Because without me, you're nothing out here." Those words, brutal and cold, cut deeper than any tabloid headline ever could. Harry, the prince who had once been adored by millions, reduced to nothing by the woman he thought was his partner. In that moment, the fairy tale ended. Not with a kiss, not with a Hollywood sunset, but with a dagger of truth. Have you ever been in a room where the silence after a fight feels heavier than the fight itself? That's what Harry endured. The silence that followed Meghan's words wasn't just awkward, it was final. He realized she wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to soften. She wasn't going to admit fault. Because in her mind, she hadn't done anything wrong. She was surviving. She was building. She was playing the game she'd always wanted to play. And Harry? He was collateral. From that moment on, Harry's confessions began to pour out. The man who once shielded Meghan with everything he had now found himself confessing to the world that he had been manipulated, controlled, sidelined. Not because he wanted revenge, not because he wanted pity, but because he could no longer bear the weight of silence. And yet, even as he confessed, Meghan's strategy didn't stop. While Harry wrestled with regret, Meghan allegedly prepared her countermoves, PR strategies, memoir drafts, whispers of new ventures. She knew the marriage was cracking, and instead of mending it, she positioned herself to win, no matter the outcome. Here's the devastating irony. Harry thought leaving the crown would save his marriage. In truth, it doomed it. The palace walls, for all their coldness, had once offered structure. Without them, the cracks became gaping wounds. And those wounds turned into betrayals. And betrayal, once tasted, cannot be forgotten. But betrayal inside the marriage was only half the story. The other half, the reaction from the family Harry abandoned, would prove even more brutal. Because while Harry was drowning, William was waiting. Charles was watching. Camilla was whispering. And their reactions to Harry's confessions would sting him in ways Meghan never could. Because when the royal family finally responded, they didn't offer sympathy. They didn't offer forgiveness. They offered something colder, sharper, and far more devastating. How did William react when Harry finally admitted the truth? That's the moment the world was waiting for. Because while Harry's confession sent shockwaves through the media, the deepest impact wasn't on the public, it was on the family he left behind. A family that had been painted as villains, accused of cruelty, indifference, even racism. A family that had endured humiliation after humiliation while Harry and Meghan cashed in on their royal exit. For them, this wasn't just about scandal. This was about vindication. Imagine being William, the older brother, the heir, the man who begged Harry to slow down, to take his time, to think carefully before committing his life to Meghan. The man who watched in horror as his younger brother turned against the crown, against their father, against him. And now, after years of silence, Harry admits William was right all along. Can you feel the fury that must have burned in William's chest? Not triumph, not smugness. Fury. Because vindication is cold comfort when it comes at the expense of family. Reports suggest William's reaction was blunt, even brutal. She's done enough damage, father. It's time. That's what he allegedly said to Charles. Words dripping with finality. No more chances. No more olive branches. William had drawn the line. And when William draws a line, the crown follows. Charles, on the other hand, was torn. A father divided between love and duty. For years, Charles had tolerated the chaos, hoping that time would heal the wounds. He remembered his own mistakes with Diana, his own public scandals. He wanted to give Harry space. But Harry's confession changed everything. Suddenly, Charles wasn't dealing with a rebellious son. He was dealing with a liability. A liability who had just admitted the crown had been manipulated for profit. And for a monarch sworn to protect the integrity of the throne, that was unforgivable. And then there was Camilla. Silent, watchful, strategic. The woman who had endured decades of public hatred, who had been blamed for Diana's misery, who had been cast as the villain in Charles's story. She, of all people, understood the power of narrative. And Meghan had tried to play the same game Camilla had once lost. But this time, Camilla was ready. This time, the institution had learned. Camilla didn't gloat. She didn't lash out. She simply leaned closer to Charles and whispered the words that sealed Meghan's fate. Distance yourself. For the crown. But the family's reaction wasn't just internal. Behind palace walls, advisors were already strategizing. How to respond. How to protect the monarchy. How to frame Harry's confession as proof that the crown was never the villain. Crisis meetings were held. Statements were drafted. Allies were briefed. And slowly, carefully, the narrative shifted. Harry's words became ammunition. The monarchy, once under siege, began to rise from the ashes. The press, too, smelled blood. The very tabloids Harry once despised now splashed his confession across front pages. Harry admits Meghan lied, they declared. Prints used for fame. Headlines that once condemned the royals now vindicated them. Public sympathy began to swing. The monarchy, long bruised and battered, found its footing again. But the fallout for Harry was personal. William, his closest ally in childhood, now colder than ice. Charles, distant and cautious. Camilla, quietly triumphant. Even Kate, once a sister-in-law he adored, reportedly refused to engage. The bridges were burned, the doors locked, the welcome mat rolled away. Harry, in trying to expose Meghan, had also exposed himself. And the family's reaction was clear: he would not be welcomed back. Not now. Perhaps not ever. And yet, in the midst of the family's fury, there was one reaction that cut deeper than all the rest. Because while William's anger was predictable and Charles's hesitation understandable, there was another figure whose silence was deafening. A silence colder than William's fury, sharper than Charles's despair, and more devastating than Camilla's quiet judgment. That silence came from someone Harry never thought would turn away. Someone he once believed would always protect him, always love him, always stand by him, no matter what. But when Harry confessed, even that bond shattered. And the silence that followed proved to him that he had lost not just his marriage, not just his family, but the one person he thought he could never lose. The question is, who was it? And why did their silence wound Harry more than all the anger in the world? The couple who once had the world's sympathy now faced its wrath. That's how quickly the tide turned after Harry's confession. For years, Harry and Meghan had been masters of narrative. Victims, survivors, outsiders fighting a cruel, outdated institution. But with one line, it was never about safety. It was always about celebrity. That entire story collapsed. And when it collapsed, the public didn't just turn away. They turned on them. At first, there was shock. Social media exploded with disbelief. Did he really say that? Was this whole thing a scam? People replayed the clip again and again, trying to process the enormity of Harry's words. The man who once begged us to believe him, the man who asked us to pity him, now admitted it was all a performance. Sympathy evaporated. What remained was anger. Because people don't like feeling fooled. They don't like investing their emotions, their compassion, their tears into a story only to discover it may have been manipulated from the start. Think about the Oprah interview. Millions cried with Meghan as she spoke of isolation, suicidal thoughts, alleged cruelty. Millions applauded when Harry condemned his family for failing to protect them. Now those same millions were asking, were we manipulated? Was every tear rehearsed, every pause calculated, every revelation designed not to tell the truth, but to build a brand? The backlash was swift. Comment sections once filled with support now overflowed with fury. Hashtags that once trended in their defense were hijacked with ridicule. Hashtag #SpareMe became a mocking echo of Harry's memoir. Memes portrayed Meghan as a director and Harry as her actor, reading from a script. What had once been their greatest weapon, their ability to control public sympathy, was now their greatest liability. And it wasn't just online. Traditional media pounced. Newspapers that once tread carefully for fear of appearing cruel unleashed scathing editorials. Pundits who had defended Meghan against racism and sexism now admitted they felt misled. Even American outlets, which had once treated Meghan as a heroine, began to sour. Hollywood doesn't love a liar, one headline screamed. But perhaps the most damning reaction came from the celebrities who had once championed them. Oprah, silent. Tyler Perry, distant. Even close friends like Serena Williams noticeably refrained from public support. Invitations to Hollywood galas dried up. The red carpets grew colder. Suddenly, Meghan's obsession with celebrity no longer looked aspirational. It looked desperate. And Harry's words ensured no one could ignore it. Here's the irony. The couple who left Britain claiming they wanted privacy became global stars by selling their privacy. They traded duty for deals, service for spotlight, loyalty for leverage. And when the illusion broke, the public saw them not as victims, but as opportunists. That's the most brutal transformation of all. And Harry? He felt it most keenly. Because while Meghan could retreat into strategy, crafting her counter-narrative, Harry couldn't escape the fury. He was Diana's son. He was the one the public loved, the one they trusted. And now, he was the one they blamed. He wasn't just Meghan's husband anymore. He was her accomplice. And accomplices don't get sympathy. They get scorn. But silence, that was Meghan's response. While the world demanded answers, Meghan said nothing. No interviews. No statements. No clarifications. Just silence. And in that silence, people heard guilt. They heard strategy. They heard a woman caught red-handed, scrambling behind the scenes to script her next move. Why didn't she defend herself? Why didn't she defend Harry? Was she waiting for the storm to pass? Or was she calculating her counterattack, the way she always had? Whatever the reason, her silence only fueled the fire. People don't forgive silence. They interpret it. And in this case, they interpreted it as proof. Proof that Harry's confession was true. Proof that Meghan had used him. Proof that the fairy tale was, from the start, a performance. But here's the twist. While the public turned against them, Hollywood itself began to react in ways even Meghan hadn't anticipated. Because Hollywood doesn't forgive either. Not failure, not scandal, not betrayal. And the very industry Meghan had sacrificed everything for began to recoil. And when Hollywood turned its back, it wasn't just a blow to Meghan's ambitions. It was the final nail in the coffin of Harry and Meghan's empire. Even Hollywood turned its back on Meghan. That was the moment the fairy tale shattered completely. The very industry she had sacrificed everything to rejoin, the lights, the cameras, the endless chase for red carpets, suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. And when Hollywood shuts its doors, it doesn't just do it quietly. It does it brutally. In the early days of their California escape, Meghan was embraced. Tyler Perry offered his mansion. Oprah extended her platform. Hollywood elites lined up to be seen alongside the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, basking in the glow of royal scandal. They weren't just celebrities. They were global icons, the couple who had defied the monarchy, the rebels who promised to rewrite history. Meghan walked into those circles as if she had finally found her stage. She was Hollywood royalty, and Harry was her crown. But then came the cracks. The Netflix docuseries, though initially hyped, was mocked for melodrama and repetition. Critics complained it was overproduced and underwhelming, filled with complaints instead of revelations. The Spotify deal collapsed in humiliation, with executives openly scoffing at the couple's lack of content. The Archetypes podcast, once hailed as groundbreaking, was written off as shallow. And Hollywood took note. Because Hollywood doesn't reward failure, it punishes it. And here's where the cruelty of the industry cuts deep. Hollywood loves ambition, but it despises desperation. Meghan's obsession with staying relevant, with forcing her way into elite circles, began to backfire. Invitations dried up. Events where she was once a guest of honor suddenly had no space. Phone calls went unanswered. Even former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to risk their own reputations by being tethered to a sinking brand. The whispers grew louder. Meghan wasn't a star, she was a liability. The industry had indulged her when the royal scandal was fresh, but now that scandal was tired. Without the drama of the crown, what was left? Another actress with middling credits and a reputation for chaos. Hollywood had seen it before, and it had no patience for it. And Harry? Harry was never the star in those rooms. He was tolerated, not celebrated. The industry respected his bloodline, but mocked his lack of charisma. Without Meghan at his side, he was awkward, uncertain, adrift. And when Meghan's luster faded, Harry's presence became even more irrelevant. They weren't power players anymore, they were outcasts. But here's the irony. Meghan had given up royal duty for Hollywood fame, believing celebrity would give her more power than the monarchy ever could. And yet, when the doors slammed shut, she had neither. No palace, no prestige, no industry backing. Just a shrinking circle of sycophants and a husband drowning in regret. And then came the ultimate betrayal, silence from Oprah. The woman who had once provided Meghan the most explosive stage in television history didn't come rushing to her defense when Harry's confession shook the world. Oprah, queen of narrative, knows when a story is finished. And Meghan's story, in Hollywood's eyes, was finished. That silence was more damning than any headline. The backlash spread quickly. Meghan's name, once whispered with awe, was now muttered with disdain. Industry insiders mocked her ambition, her endless attempts to rebrand herself. She wants to be Diana and Beyoncé rolled into one. One Hollywood producer allegedly sneered, but she doesn't understand. This isn't a fairy tale. This is business. And the cruelest cut of all, Meghan wasn't just rejected professionally. She was rejected personally. Celebrities who once smiled in photos with her now crossed the street. Gala invitations were revoked. Even charity events grew hesitant, unwilling to attach themselves to her brand. In an industry built on image, Meghan's image had collapsed. But here's where the tragedy deepens. Meghan's obsession with Hollywood wasn't just her dream, it was her shield. Fame, she believed, would protect her. If she was powerful enough, famous enough, loved enough, no one could touch her. But when Hollywood turned, the shield crumbled, and she was left exposed, vulnerable, cornered. And Harry? He watched it all unfold, powerless. The man who once gave up everything to protect Meghan now saw her empire collapsing before his eyes. And with every door that closed on Meghan, another door slammed shut on their marriage. Because Harry knew the truth. He had confessed it. It was never about safety. It was always about celebrity. And if celebrity was gone, what was left? What if the most celebrated royal wedding of our generation was never truly about love at all? What if the very man who once stood before the world, smiling nervously beside his bride, is now confessing that everything we thought we knew was a carefully orchestrated illusion? These aren't just idle questions. They are the very thoughts that keep echoing through the public's mind after Prince Harry's most shocking revelation to date. He has spoken, and his words cut through the glossy fairy tale like a knife through silk. It was never about safety. It was always about celebrity. The moment those words left his lips, it was as if the world stopped turning for a brief second. This was the man who had walked away from the most powerful monarchy on earth, citing fear for his family's safety, pleading for privacy, and demanding freedom. Yet now, years later, he tells us that the narrative was a lie, that the true motivation was something far more self-serving, far more calculated, and far more devastating. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And so, the story begins again. Let's rewind to that magical day in 2018, shall we? The sun breaking through the clouds above Windsor Castle, the carriages gliding through cheering crowds, millions watching on screens across the globe. Harry, the soldier prince, Diana's beloved son, finally finding his happiness. Meghan, the actress turned princess, glowing in Givenchy white, hailed as a symbol of diversity, modernity, and progress for a monarchy too often accused of being outdated and cold. It felt revolutionary. It felt inevitable. It felt like destiny. But what if that moment, those vows, those smiles, those tears of joy, were not what they seemed? What if behind the cameras, Meghan had already planted the seeds of a different destiny altogether, one rooted not in duty but in ambition? Harry himself has now suggested as much. His words carry the sting of betrayal and the weight of regret. He doesn't speak like a man merely reflecting. He speaks like a man who finally sees through the fog, a man who realizes he was a pawn in a larger game. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever ignored warnings because you were blinded by love? Have you ever believed so strongly in someone that you shut out the voices of caution, even when those voices came from people who loved you most? Harry admits he did. He ignored William's counsel. He brushed aside Charles's hesitation. He dismissed the whispers from palace staff who had seen Meghan's ambition firsthand. He believed he was protecting his wife, but now he tells us he was really helping her stage her grandest performance yet. That's not an easy admission to make. It's humiliating. It's heartbreaking. And it is utterly riveting. From the very beginning, Meghan's story was one of duality. On the one hand, she was the outsider, the underdog, the woman stepping into a centuries-old institution with grace and poise. On the other hand, she was a seasoned Hollywood professional, someone who understood cameras, scripts, PR, and the mechanics of fame better than any Windsor ever could. Was the royal family prepared for that level of strategic ambition? Absolutely not. Was Harry? Even less so. Now, picture this. While the public clung to the narrative of privacy and safety, Meghan was taking secret meetings with producers, cultivating celebrity friendships, and crafting a vision for life after royalty. The royal exit wasn't born in 2020. It was written years earlier. Harry, caught in the whirlwind of love and rebellion, played his part perfectly. And yet, here we are. His voice trembles as he admits, "I regret turning my back on the crown." Those words, laced with sorrow, stand in stark contrast to the defiance with which he once proclaimed independence. That shift alone is enough to spark questions. What happened behind closed doors? What changed between then and now? Why would a man so fiercely protective of his choices suddenly expose his own betrayal, his own mistakes, his own broken marriage? Could it be that the walls finally came crashing down? That the Hollywood dream Meghan promised turned out to be nothing more than smoke and mirrors? We've all seen the trajectory. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the book Spare. Each step sold as a chance for Harry and Meghan to control their narrative. And yet, instead of cementing their place as global icons, these ventures chipped away at their credibility. Deals collapsed, reputations tarnished, public opinion soured. The very fame Meghan allegedly sought became the very weight that dragged them both down. And for Harry, the breaking point was realizing that his marriage, the foundation of it all, was not the sanctuary he believed it to be. It was, in his words, manipulation. Imagine the pain of realizing the person you trusted most, the one you gave up your family and duty for, was using you as a stepping stone. Imagine confessing that to the world, knowing it would forever alter your legacy, your children's future, and your own sense of identity. That is where Harry stands now, a man stripped bare by truth. But here's where the story tightens its grip. This confession doesn't just expose Meghan. It calls into question every move she made, every headline she cultivated, every moment that was once hailed as brave. Was Meghan ever truly in love with Harry? Or was Harry simply the golden ticket into a higher echelon of fame? The beauty of this scandal lies in its contradictions. On the one hand, Meghan painted herself as a victim of the palace machine. On the other, she is now accused of being the mastermind pulling strings from day one. Harry claimed to leave the monarchy for privacy, yet signed deals that thrust him into more public scrutiny than ever before. They sought freedom, yet found themselves shackled to Hollywood's harshest critics and cruelest expectations. And through it all, Harry remained silent, until now. Now, the silence is broken, and the echoes will reverberate across Buckingham Palace, across Hollywood, across the world. Royals are bracing. Celebrities are distancing. Fans are reeling. And Meghan herself? Silent. Silent in a way that feels strategic, calculating, and perhaps even guilty. But silence cannot last forever, because Harry has ignited a storm that cannot be contained. He has opened Pandora's box, and what spills out will forever alter not only his marriage but the legacy of the crown itself. The world thought Meghan was Diana 2.0. Now, Harry suggests she was something else entirely, an actress playing her most convincing role yet. And as shocking as that is, here's the part that chills us all. The story isn't over. Because while Harry has confessed to manipulation, betrayal, and regret, he hasn't yet revealed the single, most damning detail of all, the precise moment he realized Meghan had played him. That moment exists. It's out there. And when it finally comes to light, it will shake not only their marriage, but the entire narrative we've been sold for years. But what was that moment? And why has Harry held back until now? That's the question that keeps us hooked, the question that gnaws at us in the silence of Meghan's non-response. And it is the very question that will drive us deeper into this unraveling saga. Because if Harry is telling the truth, then everything we thought we knew about Megxit was a lie. And the moment he reveals the proof, the world will never look at Meghan Markle, or the monarchy, the same way again. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When Harry spoke, his words silenced the room. That was the headline that ricocheted across the world, and for good reason. Imagine it. A prince, a son of Diana, the man who once swore he would never abandon his wife, suddenly standing before microphones and admitting the unthinkable. His voice cracked, not with fear, but with the weight of truth. It was never about safety. It was always about celebrity. With that single line, he shattered years of carefully crafted narratives, and millions of jaws dropped in unison. Think about how explosive those words truly are. For years, Harry and Meghan painted a picture of a couple fleeing persecution, desperately seeking privacy, begging to protect their children from the harsh glare of the press. They were the victims, or so we were told. But now, Harry himself confesses it was all a facade, a performance built on manipulation. Not for survival, not for safety, but for fame. And the world is left wondering. How could he say this now? Why would he risk everything to make such a brutal confession? Let's pull apart the moment. Harry didn't appear flustered or defensive. He didn't sound like a man caught off guard. He sounded like someone who had reached the end of a road paved with denial. You could see it in his eyes, a haunting mixture of relief and despair. He knew that once the words left his lips, there would be no going back. Yet he said them anyway. Was it courage, or was it the desperation of a man who finally realized he'd been used? Here's where it becomes gripping. Harry's statement wasn't made in passing. It wasn't a throwaway comment. No, this was deliberate, planned, calculated. And that alone raises another layer of questions. Did he intend to expose Meghan? Did he want to send her a message, one she couldn't spin or silence? Or was he reaching out to the public to say, I see now what you've all been seeing for years? And how did Meghan react? That silence. Oh, that silence. In the age of instant PR responses, Meghan's choice to remain silent after Harry's words spoke volumes. Was she blindsided? Or was she preparing her counterattack, carefully scripting her rebuttal the way an actress rehearses her most pivotal line? But the confession doesn't stand alone. It drags everything else with it. The Oprah interview, the Netflix deals, the Spotify fallout, the memoir Spare. If safety wasn't the true reason, then every tear shed on television, every line about trauma, every plea for privacy now looks suspicious. Was it all a performance? If Harry's words are to be believed, yes. And that reframes everything. Do you remember the image of Harry and Meghan sitting across from Oprah? Meghan clutching her baby bump, Harry holding her hand, speaking about the horrors they endured? The world gasped in sympathy. Now, in the harsh light of Harry's confession, those same images start to look like props in a show, designed to elicit sympathy, designed to set the stage for their Hollywood careers. Doesn't it make you question whether we, the audience, were complicit in fueling their rise? And what about the royal family? Can you imagine how Charles, William, even Camilla must have felt hearing Harry's words? For years, they endured the sting of accusations, that they had failed Harry, that they had pushed him away, that Meghan was driven out by cruelty. Now, Harry has admitted those accusations were built on sand. The monarchy, once cast as the villain, suddenly appears as the betrayed party. The irony is almost unbearable. But let's not forget Harry's role in this. He was not just a victim. He was an accomplice. He stood by Meghan, defended her, lashed out at his family, and co-signed every narrative. And now, years later, he claims regret. Regret for turning his back on the crown. Regret for ignoring the warnings. Regret for being blinded by love. Or was it lust? Or rebellion? Or simply the allure of something he thought was bigger than him? The tragedy here isn't just that Meghan allegedly manipulated him. It's that Harry allowed himself to be manipulated. Here's where the tension spikes. If Harry admits he was wrong, what else is he willing to confess? That's the chilling part. Because one confession rarely stands alone. It's the first domino. And once the first one falls, the rest inevitably tumble. Which secrets are next? Which truths has he been sitting on all these years, protecting Meghan, protecting himself? And the public, oh, the public. Reactions were split like never before. Some praised Harry for his honesty, saying it was about time he opened his eyes. Others sneered, claiming he was trying to rewrite history to salvage his reputation. You can't play the victim and the whistleblower, critics snapped. But beneath it all, there was one unifying reaction: shock. Genuine, unfiltered shock. Even those who despised Meghan couldn't believe Harry had gone this far. What does this confession mean for his marriage? That question lingers like smoke in the air. A marriage built on a foundation of lies cannot stand. If Harry truly believes Meghan manipulated him, how can he look her in the eye? How can he trust her with their future, their children, their legacy? The word divorce suddenly doesn't feel like tabloid fantasy. It feels like an inevitability. And Harry's confession is the crack in the dam. Once water leaks through, the flood follows. But here's what makes it even more dramatic. Harry's words were not just about Meghan. They were about himself. He admitted, in front of the world, that he made a colossal mistake. Think about the courage or desperation that takes. Most people spend their lives defending their bad decisions. Harry exposed his. That makes him, in a twisted way, more human, more relatable, and perhaps more tragic. Yet the haunting question remains. If Meghan manipulated Harry for fame, how early did it begin? Was it before the wedding? During their courtship? Was Harry, from the very first moment, nothing more than a stepping stone? The idea is brutal, heartbreaking, and cinematic in its cruelty. Imagine believing you found your soulmate, only to later realize you were just a role in her script. And what does this mean for the monarchy going forward? Harry's confession, whether intentional or not, strengthens the crown. It clears the royals of some of the darkest accusations. It restores William's credibility. It bolsters Charles. It even softens Camilla's image. In trying to expose Meghan, Harry may have accidentally redeemed his family. But this redemption comes at a cost. The cost of his marriage, his children's stability, his own peace of mind. Because the next step, the one he hasn't spoken of yet, is the most painful of all. The moment Harry realized he had been played. That precise moment when the mask slipped, when the illusion shattered, when the fairy tale dissolved into cold, calculated ambition. What was that moment? Was it a Hollywood party where Meghan ignored him for A-list friends? Was it a fight behind closed doors where she admitted the royal life was never her dream? Was it the day a contract landed on the table, and Harry realized his name, his bloodline, his trauma, were all being sold like commodities? Whatever it was, it left a scar deep enough to push Harry into confession. And now, the entire world waits for that scar to be revealed. Because once Harry describes it, once he puts it into words, Meghan's carefully curated image will be shattered beyond repair. But until then, one thing is certain. Harry's confession wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the unraveling. And what comes next will not just change his marriage. It will change history. Because the truth is finally out, and the fallout has only just begun. But the one revelation that truly broke Harry's heart, the moment he realized the marriage was doomed, has yet to be revealed. And when it comes, it will change everything. Was Megxit ever really Harry's idea? That's the question the world began asking the very moment his confession dropped like a bombshell. For years, the story had been sold as one of survival. Harry and Meghan fleeing a hostile palace, escaping a press determined to destroy them, searching desperately for safety and privacy in a cruel world. But if Harry's words are to be believed, the truth is far darker. The royal exit wasn't born in desperation. It was carefully orchestrated. Not by Harry. By Meghan. Let's rewind. Before the Netflix deals, before the Spotify collapse, before Spare, there were whispers. Insiders claimed Meghan was never truly interested in the role of a working royal. She disliked the rigid schedules, the protocols, the sense of being a supporting act to William and Kate. She didn't want to smile politely at ribbon cuttings or wave endlessly at strangers from balconies. Meghan wanted something bigger, shinier, global. And here's the twist. She had allegedly mapped out her Hollywood comeback long before the words "stepping back" ever entered the royal vocabulary. Now ask yourself this. How does someone who claims to crave privacy sign multi-million-dollar content deals that depend on constant visibility? How does someone who insists she can't handle media scrutiny seek out the very industry built entirely on exposure? The contradictions pile up until the story cracks under its own weight. Harry's confession didn't just expose a marriage, it exposed a plan. Think of the sequence. Meghan marries into royalty in 2018. Within months, reports surface of clashes with palace staff, growing tension with Kate, and frustration with the system. By 2019, there are whispers of half-in, half-out arrangements, something unheard of in royal history. Meghan gives birth to Archie, but instead of cementing her place in the family, she and Harry launch lawsuits against the press, seeding a narrative of victimhood. By late 2019, Meghan is guest editing Vogue, rubbing shoulders with celebrities, while Harry appears increasingly isolated. And then, January 2020, the announcement. They're leaving. But leaving to what? Within weeks, Meghan and Harry are in Canada, then Los Angeles, then ensconced in Tyler Perry's mansion. Not scrambling, not uncertain, but perfectly positioned. And soon after, Netflix, Spotify, Archwell, all falling neatly into place like dominoes. Does that sound like a desperate escape? Or does it sound like a blueprint finally coming to life? And here's where Harry's regret becomes almost unbearable. He admits he didn't see it. He believed Meghan's narrative. He believed they were fleeing for safety. But now he confesses it was never about safety, which means he wasn't just manipulated emotionally. He was used strategically. He was the vehicle, the key, the royal bloodline Meghan needed to launch her brand into the stratosphere. Can you imagine the pain of realizing that? To discover that the love of your life may have been writing a script all along? It's Shakespearean tragedy, but with Netflix contracts instead of poison goblets. The palace, too, wasn't blind to the signs. William warned Harry, allegedly urging him to take his time, to think carefully, to slow down. Princess and is said to have been blunt, questioning Meghan's fit within the royal mold. Even Queen Elizabeth reportedly expressed concern, quietly noting Meghan's difficulty adapting to duty. But Harry brushed it all aside, convinced that love would conquer protocol. And now, his confession reframes those warnings as chillingly accurate. But let's zoom in on the orchestration itself. Meghan's network grew rapidly after the wedding. Hollywood contacts, PR advisors, strategic friendships with Oprah, Serena Williams, Elton John. A constellation of celebrity allies, ready to welcome her back into the limelight. Deals didn't materialize overnight. These things take months, sometimes years, to negotiate. Which means when Harry and Meghan announced their exit in early 2020, there were likely already conversations, already plans, already pathways laid out. The pieces were moving long before the world realized.